So welcome to this hybrid seminar. My name is Marcia Meskimen. I'm the director of the Institute. If you are just joining us online, and I can see we are Zooming online with people, so that is wonderful. So welcome to the hybrid seminar. Welcome to the virtual IAS. And welcome to those people in the room who are here in the flesh to enjoy this wonderful kind of presentation today. For those who are staying here, who are here physically, you are very much invited to lunch afterward. For those who are virtual, I'm afraid we can't offer you lunch, but what we can offer you is an opportunity also to feed into the questions and discussion, which I will be monitoring through the Zoom format. So if you have joined us virtually, please do feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function, and you will be able to have discussion and questions as part of the wider webinar framework. So it is my pleasure as the director of the IAS, and it's been a wonderfully interesting week, and we have some crossover to be introducing a second fellow this week, Florence Gabriel, who's joining us from the University of Western Australia. Who is going to be talking to us about maths anxiety, not an anxiety I have, as we were discussing earlier, luckily, although I have many anxieties, but it's a very, very interesting juxtaposition, because yesterday, of course, we also had a mathematics seminar. So we have in the room people who are very much focused in their professional lives on maths, and people in the room who are very much able to talk to us about maths education. And we have an award-winning maths education center in this university. So this is a wonderful dialogue, I'm hoping, between different ways of approaching this topic. I'm going to be turning over now to Kinga Morsanyi, who's been the host of Florence while she's here, and who has very much been involved with a whole range of working on her stuff. You can stay seated by your owl if you wish. Who's going to do the actual introduction for Florence, but very much welcome, Florence, and we're looking forward to this forum. Kinga.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martha, and also thanks for the generous support offered by the IAS for this visit. Just to quickly introduce Flo, so she's a psychologist who's interested in math anxiety, but also like the development of mathematics skill and learning in general. So she's done work on dyscalculia, she's done work more recently on digital learning and metacognition and metacognitive regulation of learning. So she started her career in Belgium, originally from Belgium. She did her undergraduate and started her PhD in Brussels at the Free University of Brussels. And then during her PhD, she moved to Cambridge, so he finished her PhD there and stayed there for a few years as a postdoc. And after that, she moved to Paris and worked for the OECD. And then later on, she moved to Australia, where she's currently based as well. And she's in the lucky position to have a full-time permanent research position, so she can spend all her time doing interesting research. And a little known fact about Florence is that she's also a really good wildlife photographer. Yeah, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kinga. Hi, everyone. A great pleasure to be here. And thank you very much, Martha and the IAS for supporting my visit. I really appreciate it. And yes, I'm really glad to have owls as speakers. This is just wonderful. All right, so thank you very much for having me today. So I came all the way from the University of South Australia. So I live in Adelaide. And that's why I'm an enterprise fellow in education futures and a senior research fellow at the Center for Change and Complexity in Learning. So we call it C12 because it's a bit of a mouthful otherwise. As Kinga mentioned, my background is in psychology and educational neuroscience, and I've always been fascinated by the human mind and how people learn. So today I'm going to talk about mathematics anxiety. It was working now, yes. I was like, this isn't it. Oh, I promise it was working.
Okay.
It's okay. I promise we tried this twice before and it was working. There we go. Was it you or me? Okay, we'll find out. Sorry about this. So we know that mathematics anxiety is a very common problem for many students, parents, and educators. And in this presentation, I will talk about what mathematics anxiety is, and I will explore the causes and consequences of mathematics anxiety. I will also discuss evidence-informed strategies that can be used to identify and tackle maths anxiety in educational settings. And you'll see that there will be a strong focus on self-regulated learning. And towards the end, I will talk about mathematics anxiety in the wild. So what that may look like in everyday life, outside of school and university. Okay. Yes. In my work, I'm really interested in the role of cognition and emotions in learning. And one of my research interests focuses on mathematics anxiety more specifically. So in this section, we'll explore what mathematics anxiety is. Maths makes me nervous. I'm not comfortable with mathematics, or I'm not a maths person. They're all statements that we hear very often. And in a world flooded with data and numbers, obviously this type of comments has really worrying implications for society. The concept of maths anxiety was first reported and researched in the 1950s, where it was originally labeled as mathomophobia or number anxiety. And this early research was the first to show that maths anxiety is not an indicator of low maths ability or low general intelligence, and it is separate from general anxiety and test anxiety. Maths anxiety can be defined as feelings of tension, nervousness, or even fear when doing maths. And I think this cat beautifully illustrates what maths anxiety feels like, and I do use it in every presentation. Right, so as I mentioned, maths anxiety is a common problem, and it's been widely recognized for its negative impact on mathematics learning. So the research I lead at UniSA explores learners' attitudes towards mathematics, and we have shown that negative feelings towards maths appear early. So in one of our studies, we asked every student from a school, so from K to 12, to give us 5 words to express how they feel about mathematics. So this is a very simple, very effective technique that we developed together with the school in New South Wales to identify students' attitudes towards maths and any signs of maths anxiety. So preliminary results are shown on this graph with year levels on the x-axis, and you have positive words in blue and negative words in orange. So some of the positive words reported by these students included words such as excited, happy, interested, and good. And some of the negative words included anxious, stressed, sad, and frustrated. So we can see from this graph that negative words appear early, getting prominent in year 3, and they become strongly apparent in year 5 and 6. In fact, we can see that in year 6, students reported more negative words than positive words. We can also see on this graph that students in years 10, 11, and 12, they report a significant majority of negative words when describing how they feel about maths. So they're not having a great time there. And we know from PISA data, so that's the survey that's run by the OECD every 3 years, that by mid to late secondary school, about 1/3 of students report feeling tense, nervous, or helpless when dealing with mathematics. And the PISA survey is administered to 15-year-old students, so those results were also reflected in the data we collected. What does maths anxiety look like? How does it manifest? Well, it can cause physiological symptoms, such as an increased heart rate or sweaty palms, irregular breathing, stomach aches, or headaches. It can also trigger emotional symptoms. So for example, if you're a teacher and you notice a student panicking or getting angry or irritable even during a maths lesson, well, it is possible that they have maths anxiety. And finally, maths anxiety can also trigger cognitive symptoms. And these can take the shape of intrusive negative thoughts or ruminations or worries. And that's why students end up thinking things like, oh, I'm not a maths person, I can't do maths. And these worries, they will create cognitive interference and overload the working memory. So working memory is the type of memory that allows us to hold and manipulate information in our head when we complete tasks such as mental calculations, for example. And obviously, when your working memory fails, well, you won't be able to perform well in maths. And we'll go back to that a bit later in the presentation. Very interestingly, neuroimaging studies have shown that students with high levels of maths anxiety, they show more activation in brain regions associated with the detection and the experience of pain. So it's pretty serious. Young and colleagues in 2012, they used fMRI to study the neurodevelopmental basis of maths anxiety in 7 to 9-year-old children. So these children were asked to solve additions and subtractions in an fMRI scanner. And as you can see on this figure, they showed that maths anxiety was associated with hyperactivity in the right amygdala regions. And these regions are important for processing negative emotions. And on top of that, they found that the connectivity between the amygdala and the brain regions that regulate negative emotions, they were higher in children with maths anxiety compared to those who didn't suffer from maths anxiety. I also wanted to add, so I think it's important, that these effects were specific to maths anxiety, and they were unrelated to general anxiety, intelligence, working memory, or even reading abilities. So these researchers, they were able to identify the neurodevelopmental mechanisms of maths anxiety. Right, gender differences are often reported in the literature on maths anxiety. So for example, colleagues from the University of Cambridge, they ran a large study with years 7, 8, and 9 students. And they didn't find any gender differences for maths performance, but levels of maths anxiety were higher for girls than they were for boys. And what they also showed is that maths anxiety was a significant predictor of performance for girls, but not for boys. So that's quite interesting. And from our own research, we also found gender differences as shown on this figure. So we again asked learners from K to 12 to report 5 words to express how they feel about maths. And this time we coded their responses as positive, negative, or ability-based. So what we classified as ability-based were words such as challenging or complex or hard. So that's when students perceived maths as an ability-based subject. And on this graph, we have responses from girls on the left and responses from boys on the right. And we can see from these results that there were no differences between ability-based words between girls and boys, but very clearly girls reported more negative words than boys did. And the results on this slide, they came from the whole score, right, from K to 12. But we found that this difference starts early. So as early in year 3, we can see that girls start using more negative words to describe how they feel about mathematics compared to boys. All right, in the next section, I'll talk about the causes and effects of mathematics anxiety. Let's first explore what prompts maths anxiety. So we'll see that there are multiple causes that have been hypothesized in the literature to explain this phenomenon. And some children may have a cognitive predisposition to develop maths anxiety. And in adults, it's often associated with deficits in one or more of the fundamental building blocks of mathematics. And some researchers actually speculate that a poor grasp of basic building blocks early in schooling may predispose learners to develop maths anxiety, and that's partly in response to potential struggles with the subject. So if it's the case, we can assume that learners who struggle with maths, they would be more likely to be anxious about it, right? So and this is known as the deficit theory, which claims that maths anxiety stems from poor performance in maths. There's another theory called the debilitating theory, which explains that maths anxiety reduces performance by causing avoidance of maths-related situations. And a more recent theory has been proposed, and it's called the reciprocal theory. And it states that high anxiety contributes to poor performance, which in turn contributes to high anxiety, and that creates a negative feedback loop. In the literature, we can see that different types of factors have been identified to explain what causes maths anxiety. Individual factors have been put forward to explain maths anxiety, and these include genetics, working memory capacity, or attentional bias. Interpersonal factors have also been identified, and these include parental attitudes and their support, and also teachers on maths anxiety. And there are also environmental factors that can explain maths anxiety, including classroom atmosphere and cultural background. So most of the research on maths anxiety has been conducted in silos without necessarily considering the connection between these different factors. And we still don't know much about the multi-level nature of maths anxiety. But in a recent study, Lau and colleagues, they used multiple large-scale international studies of student achievement. So they used PISA and TIMSS. And they looked at individual and environmental predictors of maths anxiety. And the main finding of this study was that individual factors were the strongest predictors of maths anxiety. So that means that factors that are unique to individual students, independently of their educational environment, are the most consistent predictors of maths anxiety. And this is, I think, a really interesting study because it shows how complex the causes of maths anxiety are, and then suggests that we should study potential causes concurrently. Do you suffer from maths anxiety yourself? And if you do, and you're a parent, or if you interact with children on a regular basis, well, be careful not to pass it on to the children around you. Think about your own attitudes towards maths. I know we have some mathematicians in the room, so this may not apply. But oftentimes people are not ashamed to say, oh, I'm hopeless at maths, but they would never say something like, I'm hopeless at reading, right? So is this something you may have said in the past? Just pause and reflect on this for a minute. Right, so parents' maths anxiety was identified as a strong predictor of children's maths anxiety in the last study I just presented. And there's also really interesting work on the impact of parents' maths anxiety, particularly when dealing with their children's homework. So when children turn to their parents for help with their maths homework, it can backfire if the parents are anxious themselves. And this was shown in a recent study conducted in Canada. So parents can communicate their fears, their negativities, and their frustrations to their children, who can then internalize them. And in the worst case, just avoid maths entirely. So parents with high levels of maths anxiety, they may become flustered when their children's teacher uses new strategies that parents have never come across themselves. So that might cause children to lose confidence in their ability and then invest less effort into learning mathematics. And obviously that means that eventually that performance will suffer. Working memory can also explain the link between maths anxiety and maths performance. So we know from research in educational psychology that working memory is very important for doing maths, and that working memory capacity increases with age in childhood. So when students feel anxious, their maths anxiety is using some of their working memory, and it means that there are not enough resources left to solve maths problems. Bylock and Carr conducted an experiment in which they measured the working memory of about 100 undergraduate students. And they gave these students a set of maths problems in two situations: a low pressure situation, where participants were told that the maths test was just a practice test, and then a high pressure situation, when they were told that they could win money based on how quickly and how correctly they could solve the maths problems. And you can see the results on this figure here. So the high capacity working memory students are in blue, and they perform better than the low capacity working memory students in red in the low pressure situation. However, when the stakes were high, the high capacity working memory students, they performed at the same level as the low capacity working memory students. So these researchers, they concluded that individuals with greater working memory capacity, they are more susceptible to performance deficits as a result of working memory disruptions. And this is what they called choking under pressure effects. So why does it matter? What are the consequences of maths anxiety? Well, when students experience maths anxiety, they tend to rush through maths questions, they lose focus, or they simply give up when they think it's too hard. And they're usually less confident, and they're less likely to think of and try multiple strategies when they're solving maths problems. So the short-term effect of this anxiety is a decline in maths achievement. But there are also long-term consequences, and this mainly translates into avoiding anything that has to do with mathematics. So it's important to mention, if a student experiences maths anxiety, it does not mean that they are necessarily bad at maths, right? There are students who could become mathematicians or engineers, programmers, scientists, economists, but they are deterred by their anxiety, and they will subsequently avoid subjects, courses, or careers that involve mathematics. And if we go back to gender differences that I mentioned earlier, and if we look at diversity in maths and STEM professions more generally, we can see that we're still very far from reaching gender equity in this space. And I'd like to share some not so great statistics from Australia. So in Australia, it's quite alarming to see that only 16% of the STEM skilled workforce comprises women, and 9 out of 10 women with a STEM qualification are employed in non-STEM related fields. So we're not quite there yet. So we know that early disengagement in maths can have long-term consequences for the workforce, and there's still a lot of work to do. We recently published a research report presenting practical solutions for future and current employees, and also for current and future leaders. So you can follow that reference there, and it's freely available online if you're interested. Right, so we have seen that maths anxiety is an emotional reaction to maths. And we know that emotions can play a crucial role in the learning process, shaping students' motivation, their cognitive processes, and their behaviors. And until recently, emotions hadn't received a lot of attention in the field of the science of learning. But over the last 20, 25 years, research in this field has consistently highlighted the importance of emotions in learning settings, and also their impact on students' decision-making processes and their learning and their achievement. So if we look at a bit of theory now, the control value theory provides a very useful theoretical framework to help us understand anxiety in learning contexts. So according to this theory, the experience of emotion in achievement settings, it's determined by 2 types of appraisals, those relating to control, so that could be expectations for success or confidence or self-concept beliefs, and those relating to value, so the level of importance that we ascribe to a task. So students' emotions in academic settings, they are influenced by their perception of control over their learning experiences and the value they place on the academic task. So according to this theory, anxiety is the emotion experienced when perception of low control are combined with appraisals of value. So in other words, when students value a subject in some way, but they feel that they don't have control over their performance, they're likely to feel anxiety. In contrast, for example, perceptions of low control combined with appraisals of low value, they're likely to result in the experience of boredom. Right, so the control value theory also conceptualizes anxiety as the emotion experienced when uncertainty is associated with learning. And so the focus of the students' thinking here is on the anticipation and sometimes even the expectation of failure. My collaborator, Dr. Sarah Buckley from the Australian Council for Educational Research, she discusses this in a very interesting paper she published with Peter Sullivan in 2021. And in this paper, they discuss pedagogical approaches focusing mostly on self-regulated learning as a potential solution to reduce maths anxiety. So they argue that classrooms that encourage students to embrace challenge, they will help normalize uncertainty and then promote more positive attitudes and engagement with maths. So the key here really seems to be giving students more control over their learning, and I'll talk about this in further detail in the next section. Right, so we'll see in this section that there are things that can be done to prevent or alleviate maths anxiety. It's not all gloom and doom. One of the strategies that can be used is the development of strong self-regulated learning skills. By learning how to learn, students have the opportunity to take control over their learning and then regulate and deal with their negative emotions. Right. Learning how to learn is a process that can be supported by self-regulated learning. And there are many, many different models of SRL in the literature. But as you can see on this slide, it can be summarized as an active cyclical process where students plan, monitor, review, and then regulate their cognition, their metacognition, their motivation, and their emotions. So the three main common phases are used in SRL models are planning, monitoring, and reviewing or reflecting. And in each of these phases, you have different strategies and processes taking place. So you have cognitive strategies, and that could be things like summarizing or note-taking or rehearsal, and they will help with memorization. Then we have metacognition, which is often described as thinking about thinking, and it's been shown to be a strong predictor of academic achievement. But what's important to note here in learning settings is that it's hard to change your thinking if you're not aware of your thinking, right? So instead of describing metacognition as thinking about your thinking, you can think about it as an awareness of your learning or taking control of your learning. And the research literature also highlights the importance of motivational and emotional processes. So these processes are both critical for successful learning as they drive initial engagement, perseverance, and then ultimately performance on learning tasks. So you have positive emotions such as enjoyment, hope, or pride, and they will promote motivation and will enable students to control their engagement with learning tasks and then ultimately enhance their commitment to their learning goals. Right, so strong self-regulated learners, they actively construct knowledge and they use a variety of cognitive and metacognitive strategies to control and regulate their academic learning. A self-regulated student can be characterized as a student who's aware not only of the task requirements, but also of their own needs with regard to optimal learning experiences. So self-regulated learners view learning as a controllable process, right? Where they constantly plan, organize, monitor, and reflect on their learning process. We recently published a study in collaboration with ACER, and we looked at the relationship between maths anxiety and self-regulated learning. So for this study, we analyzed data from the PISA survey, and we looked at the responses of more than 4,000 Australian 15-year-old students. And our study showed that higher levels of maths anxiety were associated with higher levels of instrumental motivation. So that's the degree to which students find mathematics relevant, but lower levels of self-concept. So that students' beliefs in their own abilities in mathematics, lower levels of perseverance, so that willingness to keep working on difficult problems, and lower levels of self-efficacy. So students' beliefs in their ability to solve specific mathematical tasks. But interesting, we showed a domino effect where low self-concept leads to higher levels of maths anxiety, which then affects perseverance and in turn affects self-efficacy. And this interconnected loop eventually will have a negative impact on maths achievement. So to break this vicious circle, our research supports the idea that we need to build and grow student confidence in maths instead of focusing on achievement and performance, which is something I have seen in quite a few schools. Building and growing student confidence can be achieved by improving their self-regulated learning skills, as it will allow them to take control and take ownership of their learning. So now I'm going to talk about one of the approaches we are currently implementing in a couple of schools to support the development of students' self-regulated learning in primary years. So my colleague, Dr. John Kennedy, designed this 3-course dinner protocol, which is based on Van der Waals' work. And maybe you thought we were done with QR codes after the pandemic, but no, here it is. You can access the document by scanning the QR code if you want to learn more and have access to additional resources that have been designed. So let me briefly walk you through the approach here. So the 3-course dinner approach, entree, main, dessert, adopts practices that emerge from self-regulated learning. So think about that 3-phase cycle of SL that I showed earlier. During the entree, the teacher creates a risk-free environment that enables students to prepare for the learning to come. And then the skill of the teacher lies in selecting activities that will activate conventions and conceptions that the students are able to draw on during the planning phase of self-regulated learning. And then during the main course, the teacher observes the students' learnings and their attempts to build applications to solve the tasks they were given. And then the teacher needs to ensure that there's enough time, enough space, and enough freedom for the students so that they can progress through that SRL cycle as many times as necessary. And then the students will naturally move from planning to monitoring their performance and then reflecting on their work. And finally, during the dessert, the students can use questioning that can result in deep reflection from the students as they make judgments about the suitability of the solutions they found for the problems. So we're currently working with teachers in South Australia and New South Wales, and they've been providing a number of lesson plans following this format. So our hope is to publish these resources maybe for the end of the year or early next year and make them freely available. So together with these teachers, we are developing research-informed classroom trial resources that other teachers will be able to use in their own classroom to support their students' self-regulated learning. Right, let's now have a look at what that could look like in higher education. So another important aspect of self-regulated learning is linked to how we regulate our emotions. And researchers from the US have developed interventions, the interventions aimed at improving students' emotion regulation. And these studies have shown great promise to reduce students' maths anxiety. Right, so one strategy that can be used is to ask students to write out their emotions and also their worries. So Park and colleagues, they tested undergraduate students who varied in terms of maths anxiety. And the control group was asked to sit quietly before completing the maths problems, whilst the intervention group, they were asked to write their thoughts and their feelings about the maths test they were about to take. So for the control group, students who were highly maths anxious, they performed significantly worse on the test than students with low levels of maths anxiety. Before the intervention group, the difference between students with low and high levels of maths anxiety was significantly reduced. So this writing intervention, it works well because it helps students reflect on their emotions, essentially. They can question the need to worry in the first place and this will end up freeing up working memory resources that would otherwise be taken up by ruminations and worries. Other successful interventions in higher education have focused on reappraisal. So that's an important strategy that can help students reframe the symptoms of maths anxiety as excitement. So, for example, acknowledging that an increased heart rate that's common to both anxiety and excitement. It's a bit what I did before my presentation. It's working. So, for example, Jameson and colleagues, they tested undergraduate students who enrolled in a maths course. And there were two groups of students, a control group, and then a group who was assigned to a stress reappraisal condition. Reappraisal instructions taught students about the benefits of stress arousals. And the control group, they were told to ignore stress. And reappraisal improved performance by increasing students' perception of their ability to cope with stressful testing situations. So strategies like these ones, they show that it's not strictly necessary to completely suppress the negative emotions, as long as students are able to manage and regulate them in a more positive way. So really the take-home message, I think, here is that students are allowed to feel these negative emotions, but it's what they do with them that matters. Right, for the last section of this presentation, I would like to talk about mathematics anxiety in the wild. So maths anxiety has been widely recognized for its negative impact on learning, and most studies on maths anxiety have been conducted in educational settings. But there is still a lot to uncover about how it affects people in their everyday lives. Right. One of the very few studies that examine maths anxiety outside of educational contexts came from America, where Hart and Gagne tested about 1,000 adults online, and they examined the nature of maths anxiety in that group. And their results show that maths anxiety followed a distribution similar to a bell curve, with most participants falling between experiencing some anxiety and a moderate level of anxiety. And they also discovered significant negative correlations between maths anxiety and both probability knowledge and also maths fluency. So I think in a world full of numbers and data, getting a better understanding of the effects of maths anxiety on our daily lives is particularly important. And this is the focus of the work I've been doing this week with Kinga, and it's kindly supported by the IAS. Right, so let me just tell you a bit more about what we've been up to this week. So the project we are designing will use an experience sampling methodology to explore how adults interact with and how they feel about numbers and maths in their everyday lives. So this approach, the experience sampling, it's been used in other fields, like in health studies, for example, but it's quite a novel approach in the field of mathematical cognition. And the results of this study, they will help provide a more thorough picture of how maths anxiety affects adults' daily lives when they're out of school and out of university. So the plan so far would be to collect data over 10 days, and participants will be prompted to either fill out a survey or execute a task at different time points. So we'll ask participants to download an app called Sampling, which is usually used in experience sampling studies. And then the app will send them a notification, and then they can fill out a maths anxiety survey. We'll also ask them to fill out a couple of numeracy tests. And we'll ask them to tell us how they feel about the maths they encounter in their everyday lives. And we will be using the control value theory that I discussed earlier as a guiding theoretical framework. We'll collect data on like various demographic information, so gender identity, age, highest level of education, and highest level of formal schooling in mathematics. And over the course of the study, participants will receive a daily notification at a random time between, let's say, 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And they'll be requested to report the kind of numbers and maths they've encountered in the last hour. how often they encountered these numbers and maths, and also how they felt when they encountered these numbers. So they'll be provided with a checklist of different types of numbers and data they could potentially encounter, and that shouldn't take much time, probably just 10 minutes per day. So these are some of the research questions that we will explore in the study that we're preparing. So to what extent do people encounter numbers or data in their everyday lives? We'll also be very interested in looking at maths avoidance, because there's very few work done in this space, so that this could be a really good opportunity to look at the influence of mathematics anxiety on how people interact and are they avoiding mathematics at all. So we'll explore how people feel when they encounter numbers or data, and we'll look at the impact of maths anxiety and the way people feel about these numbers in their everyday life. So this study will be a useful stepping stone to establish a larger project looking at maths anxiety in the wild, so beyond the classroom, and then its impact on people's numerical and data literacy. And I think that will be the next step in our international collaboration. So I think it's time to bring this presentation to a close, and I would like to acknowledge some of my wonderful colleagues at C3L who have been embarking on this research journey with me to understand maths anxiety a bit better. So Dr. John Kennedy, Dr. Rebecca Morsanyi, and Associate Professor Simon Leonard. I would also like to thank the IAS for this wonderful opportunity and for allowing me to stay here in Loughborough. And also, obviously, Dr. Kinga Morsanyi, who's been a wonderful host, friend, and collaborator. Here's my email address. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email. Here's my Twitter handle. I'm not sure how long Twitter will still be the thing, but for now. Happy to answer any questions now or over lunch. So thank you very much.